Welcome to the pharmaphorum podcast. This is web editor Nicole Raleigh, and today I'll be speaking with Kris Kaneta, Chief Product Officer at Norstella, which is helping life sciences companies speed up development with instant strategy recommendations. Welcome, Kris.
Hi, Nicole. Thanks so much for having me.
So today we'll be discussing AI in drug trials and commercialization, and just what's possible when clinical AI has access to a dataset robust enough to allow it to make real strategic recommendations. But before we sink our teeth into our central topic, Kris, I was wondering if you could briefly introduce yourself for listeners and describe the journey that led you to doing what you do today at Norstella.
Thanks, Nicole. Yes, my name is Kris Kaneta, and I have the privilege of serving as Norstella's Chief Product Officer. So real quick on Norstella, we serve over 3,000 clients globally. We provide intelligence that pharma and biotech companies come to rely on to make decisions across the entire drug lifecycle, from pipeline to patient. So portfolio strategy, clinical trial planning, market access, and commercialization, as well as real-world evidence. As Chief Product Officer, I really get to oversee how we make the most comprehensive pharma intelligence data in the industry actionable through AI. And, just recently last year, we were named one of Fast Company's most innovative, specifically ranked number 4 for data science. So it is a fascinating time at Norstella as we continue to innovate and solve some of pharma's toughest challenges.
Thank you, Kris. A fascinating time indeed, as you say. Now, it goes without saying that AI is advancing at pace. So first of all, Kris, I was wondering if you could explain for us what you've been seeing when it comes to the use of AI in clinical trials evolving in just the, say, past 3 years.
Yes, so it is a fascinating time, and as we zoom out and we think about where pharma is, if we take out, for example, GLP-1s, the internal return for a lot of pharma development is down to about 3.8%. If I compare that to, say, 10 years ago, that was about 6.5%. So we're at a point now where uh, development and bringing life-changing therapies to market is getting increasingly more expensive. And so as I think about AI and the purpose it serves, there's a couple of things. One, it's the journey to help life sciences get closer to the patient, right? Get closer to the patient, not only in terms of what are the obstacles to a patient getting on therapy, but also understanding where those patients are, right? And so that's the first thing I think about. And then the second thing I think about is how AI is advancing and compressing time to insight, time to action, compressing the decision making process, whether it's thinking about the billions being invested in the pipeline, to thinking about how we are approaching investigator selection and protocol design, to thinking about what's the best path as I think about commercializing a new to market drug and thinking about market access.
So very much focused on the patient there, your response to this evolution in the use of AI in clinical trials in just the past 3 years. So I was wondering if we could tunnel down into that a little bit more, Kris, for our listeners, and really give us your crystalline overview of this importance of patient data. Put it plainly for us, why is patient-level data pharma's most important asset in the AI race?
Yes, this is such a great question. And I think it's particularly having a moment because of the computational power of AI. So as I think about the plethora of rural data that is out there, from claims to lab to EHR, both structured and unstructured, and so forth, uh, the first question you have to ask yourself is, it's can I just throw AI at it? The answer is really no. Right? I just can't throw AI at a bunch of data and expect to get tangible, actionable insights that are going to guide a multi-billion dollar portfolio or investment decision. So how we think about it at Norstella, for example, is we have not only brought these data assets together, but we have structured them and linked them and mastered them such that there are about 75 billion unique data points across our real world data investments. And because of that, we can now take particular use cases such as patient recruitment, for example, and get to a very high degree of specificity of where those patients are that might be most suitable for a clinical trial. Not only where they are, but can I understand their past treatment patterns? Can I understand what prior therapies they were exposed to? Can I understand what is the trial landscape around those patients and the investigators that might be around those patients to help me think about investigator selection or protocol design, and ultimately getting the right patients onto my trials and therapies.
Thank you, Chris. So you mentioned the importance for portfolio and investment decisions. Then, how is it that data is synthesized to deliver effective commercial predictions?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So one of the things that we sought to do early on is really understand trial duration as an example. So, it's pretty well documented that, delaying a trial is somewhere around the neighborhood of 800,000 US dollars a day. And 35 to 40% of clinical trial sites never enroll a single patient. So as we looked at both the real world data and the historical data around the trial landscape, we sought to understand how good is a human at actually predicting the duration of a clinical trial. And what we found is that through AI and our models, we were actually able to forecast somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 60% better what that actual trial duration would be based on certain criteria. So now you take that understanding and you take this understanding of what you expect a trial to actually span over time. Now I can start to actually tweak the variables and the assumptions and how I think about a clinical trial. And so it's not just a matter of whether or not, for example, that investigator has a really great track record. It could also be a factor of, hey, what other trials is this investigator currently conducting? And is it in direct competition with my trial? What are the other trials in a geographic vicinity that might be pulling patients that I'm also trying to target and recruit? Right. And then the second thing is then understanding the protocol and the inclusion and the exclusion criteria, the endpoints, and trying to avoid the redesigning of that protocol, which would ultimately then cost my trial to be pushed back and further delayed. So all of these things can now be modeled with both historical data and structured rural data together to really get a very clear picture of what we think trial duration is going to look like and allow clinical trial leaders to better forecast and plan.
Thank you, Chris. So, talking about better forecasting and planning and segueing to sort of looking to the future, a bridge to, if listeners are wondering whether I'm closing this podcast now, no, I'm not. 2 seconds, please. I wanted to bridge on the recent information that there's a partnership between Norstella's sub-brand Sightline and Recursion. I was wondering if you could tell us more about that in the landscape of what we've been discussing today.
Yes. First, Recursion is an extraordinarily advanced and ambitious tech bio organization with an outstanding team of leaders. And this really has happened through, or rather organically, through conversations of how Recursion is trying to embed artificial intelligence into their own clinical trial planning. And it just became a really natural extension as we think about our ability to help drive further specificity, further accuracy, and further actionability in terms of clinical trial planning. So, with this partnership, Recursion will be able to take advantage of and is taking advantage of our investigator selection AI, which again models the best investigators to drive towards your desired outcome from a clinical trial perspective, as well as our protocol smart design planning tool, again, to model that protocol, and then ultimately translate that into, okay, given the investigators I've identified, given the protocol that I've designed, where are these patients? And help me understand the cohort of patients that is available to me and where are they?
Thank you, Chris. So that brings me to my penultimate question. I was wondering if, for listeners' sakes and for clarity, you could once more walk us through this process of how AI can derive a strategic, a novel, and a trustworthy recommendation for trial sponsors.
This is such a great question. So let me break it up into a couple of pieces. I think the first and foremost question on everyone's mind when it comes to using AI, in particular big mission critical activities like clinical trial planning and patient recruitment, is how trustworthy is it? How accurate is it? And this is where we come back to the original one of the original points I was making. It's not just a matter of having data to feed and support an AI model, whether that's machine learning or a large language model, and getting to an insight. It is about ensuring traceability and citability to that structured data. In the case of Norstella, because we've been really a partner and providing pharma intelligence for decades, we are fortunate to have a deeply embedded ontology and master data that cuts across clinical trial sites and investigators and understanding the what has taken place over time and then coupling that with real world data. And so because we have this data structured and linked, I can then deliver greater confidence that the model output has appropriate citation and sources that back up the claim, that back up, here's how I made this decision. And more importantly, when we think about the next evolution, as we take these products more and more to an agentic forefront, is being able to then, how do I tweak those assumptions? What if that particular source of data is not what I think it is in the real world? And what if I want to tweak it? What if I want to change those sets of assumptions and rerun that model and give me a new understanding of what the future might hold? This is all made possible because that structured data is there to be referenced with clear ontologies and again linked across all of these different vantage points throughout the drug lifecycle.
You've preempted my closing question there,
Oh
Chris. So
no.
you've been mentioning the future. You've been mentioning an agentic forefront. So my final question is indeed that future-looking question. Tell listeners, tell us at pharmaphorum, what capabilities for AI in clinical trials will we see surface in, say, the next 5 years or more? And what might be potential roadblocks along the way?
That is such a great question. Here's what I will do. I will give you my view of what will happen over the next couple of years. I think over the next 5 years is impossible, really. I mean, things are just moving so quickly. Yeah, I think Bill Gates popularized the statement that we tend to overestimate what will happen over the next two, but underestimate what will happen over the next 10. I actually think that 2 year and 10 year mark with the advent of AI is more like 1 year and 5 years, maybe even less. It's even more compressed. So I'll say this. First of all, I'm super excited because actually, as we speak, we have 30 of our brightest product and technology experts together for a couple of weeks, and they are really reimagining what an agentic future will look like and will hold for Norstella and for our industry. And as I think about the future, a couple of things come to mind. Number one is ultimately our clients, our customers don't think in terms of products and data sets. They think in terms of questions. I have a question to which I need an answer. The historical way of thinking about that might be an analytical data set, a dashboard, something to that effect. Well, that in and of itself is a flawed view of history because today, tomorrow, it's about having that insight served up to me before I even have to ask. Right. So as I think about what we're doing with agentic AI and what we're doing with our data, is we're actually delivering in June our first full agentic product offering, which will look at the competitive intelligence landscape, which is, a close sister to as we think about clinical trials. And what that'll mean is that I'll not only be able to synthesize deep research around what's happening in say a trial landscape or a competitive landscape, but I'll also be alerted to key events and catalysts. I'll also be informed as to what is the actual implication to my therapy, to my pipeline, to my drug that's in market. And then I'll be able to scenario that out and say, hey, what would happen if this drug didn't get approved? Or what would happen if this drug accelerated its time to approval and time to market? All of these things can be done, if you will, today in a manual sense or in a somewhat automated sense, but they aren't served to you agentically without even having to really contemplate the next three, four, five things or next three, four, five questions that I would have to ask. I think that's a huge part of it. I think the second part of it is, and we've been talking about this as an industry for a long time, is the digital twin for a trial simulation, and what exactly that means, right? Especially as we think about using real world evidence in a control arm and driving that level of insight. I think the unknown question to me is, as an industry, from a regulatory perspective, what's going to be our appetite? I do think it's moving quickly, and I do think that the industry will ultimately, likely sooner than later, start to embrace this notion more and more that I can look at what is out there in the real world, stimulate a series of events, and compare that to, say, a real clinical trial to get to a really solid understanding of the impact of my drug on a rare disease or an at-risk patient population, what have you.
Just wonderful. So appetite and questions accelerating towards accuracy in the clinical trial field. Thank you very much for your time today, Kris. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Nicole. It was great spending time with you.
And that concludes another episode of the pharmaphorum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about previous installments at pharmaphorum.com/podcasts. The pharmaphorum podcast is also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Podbean, and pretty much wherever else you download your other podcasts from. Just search for pharmaphorum and follow and hit subscribe. Of course, don't forget to visit our website itself, where you can sign up for daily and weekly news and analysis bulletins. And do follow us on Blue Sky and LinkedIn at pharmaphorum. That's all for now. Thank you for listening.